So we're carrying on our series, Walking with Jesus, through Mark's Gospel. And we said at the beginning we would go through verse by verse, chapter by chapter. And when we do that, that makes us pick up these difficult, sometimes painful, awkward subjects. And this is one of them. So Mark chapter 10, we're going to read from verse 1 to the end of verse 12. And I want to say, I'm not here to embarrass or to shame or to make anyone feel awkward or feel guilt and condemnation from your current experience or a past experience. What we're doing is simply looking at what Jesus says. And as we go into the context, as we unpack these verses and other verses, we will get a bigger picture, because Jesus isn't speaking about divorce in isolation. In these verses in chapter 10 up to the end of verse 45, there are three, the end of verse 31. There are three juxtapositions that Jesus highlights. So for those of you that are a bit confused, a juxtaposition is two statements that seem to contradict one another. And there are three of them in these verses. Now, the context is that Jesus is teaching and preaching. And as we've seen before, whenever there's this potential of a messianic figure arising in Israel, the priests, the Pharisees, and the teachers of the law would investigate. They would watch the miracles, they would listen to the teaching, and then they would investigate, did this really happen? What is the source of the teaching, and what does this person believe? And that's the point we're at in Mark chapter 10, verse 1. Jesus left that place where he told people that if you sin, cut your hand off, cut your foot off, poke your eye out. And he said then, that's not literal, that's to show us how severe God deals with and looks at sin. It's a really serious issue. So Jesus leaves the place and he goes over to Judea and across the Jordan. Crowds of people come to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him. So this wasn't a question that was asked out of genuine concern or a moment of teaching. They were trying to trick him. They were trying to trap him. So they said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Now in the Gospel, that's the way it's worded in all the Gospels. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Because in those days a woman could not divorce her husband. It just was never thought of. It wasn't part of their law or their culture. Only the man could divorce his wife. So they asked the question, Jesus, is it lawful? What do you think? And Jesus, being Jesus, doesn't tell them what he thinks. He doesn't go with culture or wokeism like some of our leaders would do. He points them to Moses. He points them to the law. Verse 3, what did Moses command you? He replied. They said, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. So he points them to the law. He asks the question, what does the law say? What does Moses say? And they respond correctly. Then Jesus says, it was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. Jesus replied, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one. There's the juxtaposition in the first part. Two become one. And I'm not talking about the Spice Girls song, for those of you that know the Spice Girls song. For those of you that don't know the song, don't worry, don't bother. But two become one is the juxtaposition that Jesus talks about. A little bit later on, and we'll look at this next week, he talks about adults becoming like children. That's the second juxtaposition. And the third one in this chapter is when he says, the first shall be last. Seemingly contradictory positions, but actually they make perfect sense. Because the author of all creation, he's talking, he's teaching in this moment. At the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And I'm going to say it again, I say it every time we quote these verses. There are only two genders. There's a whole lot of confusion, but there are only two genders. You might feel like a cat, you're not. I might feel like a 5'0" Filipino woman, I'm not. I'm a 6' bald, ugly Scotsman. That's okay, that's who I am. And that's going out online. There are only two. I used to laugh and think, why did God put this in the Bible? And this was years ago. It's almost like God knew. almost like he knew. There would be this point in time where there would be confusion, where our political leaders, where even some of our church leaders would squirm and sweat when asked the question, what is a man? What is a woman? Interestingly, when you're dead, you haven't got any feelings. You might have felt you were a cat, but you might have felt you were a woman when actually biologically you're a man, or conversely, if you're a woman. But when you're dead, your body, your skeleton reveals, unless it's been burned, your skeleton reveals what you are. There's only one bone in the human body that defines who you are sexually, and that does not change, and that is your hips. Men's hips are different to women's hips, and it's really obvious when you're dead. So someone may feel like a woman. Said it before, a bloke in a dress is always going to be a bloke in a dress. God knew there was going to be this confusion in the world. So Jesus says, in the beginning, God created them, male and female. Male and female, he created them. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife. Now, I've said already, I don't want to make anyone feel awkward or difficult. We're in a situation, most of you are aware, that our eldest boy is now going through a very painful, a very messy, a very complicated divorce. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that would happen. Never in my imagination did I ever think the divorce would come so close to our door. Some of you have heard this before, but it's worth repeating. That in 41 years of marriage, Caroline and I have never ever thought about divorce. Murder, yes. Divorce, no. But actually, in the law, they're both wrong. And we can joke about it, but it's not a funny subject. There is so much pain, because it doesn't just involve the two individuals who are being torn apart, the whole family. Not just the children, but the parents, and the grandchildren, and the cousins, and the aunts, and the uncles. And in the awkward moments when the children grow up and they get married, and the divorced partners come, and the two parties that don't speak to each other, that look upon each other with loathing, come together to celebrate a union or a birthday or a graduation or whatever it is, the pain is not over when the final certificate comes through the door. I have counseled people who have been legitimate biblically in their reason for wanting a divorce because one of the partners has gone off and been sexually promiscuous or unfaithful to someone with someone else. So biblically, they have this right that Moses gave them to divorce. I want to say very clearly, divorce is not God's ideal. It's not God's best. It's not what God has planned for you. His plan from the beginning was that man and woman, they would leave their parents, they would come together, and they would cleave to one another, and the two would become one. Now we understand that when a couple get married and they do what they have to do, and a child is born, they think, that's it, that's the two become one. It's not just in children that two become one. It's in the actual union of a man and a woman coming together. There is something mysterious, there is something spiritual that happens in that moment. That in God's eyes, they're no longer one flesh, they're two flesh. And it's interesting that this conversation happens on the back of Jesus saying to people, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. That's exactly what divorce is like. It's like cutting something off from yourself because two have become one. And I know for those of you that have been through that or are going through that, it is so painful and it is so difficult. But Jesus isn't saying this to shame people or hurt people or cause pain. He's saying, guys, this was God's ideal at the beginning. That the man and the woman would come together, they would cleave to one another, they would hold fast to one another. Not just for a few moments, not just for years, but for life. They will become one flesh, so they're no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. And when they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. They wanted to know more. And he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. Now it's worth stopping there for a whole lot of reasons. I said to you a few moments ago that women could not divorce men at that time. It wasn't part of the legal system, it wasn't part of the Mosaic law, it wasn't part of culture. But Jesus, in his response to the disciples, says, if a man divorces his wife, or if a woman divorces her, in that moment of teaching, Jesus elevates women to the same position as men. What the man can do legally, the woman can do. That's a huge statement that Jesus makes there. And this whole thing about surrendering and submitting and laying things down. You see, Jesus, when he says, Moses allowed this because of the hardness of our hearts. And it's really difficult when someone hurts you, or disappoints you, or betrays you, or does a whole heap of stuff, to trust them again, to keep loving them, to carry on in that moment of being together, when the easiest option would be to separate. I'm going to tell you, when a marriage gets messy, none of the options are easy. Sticking together takes hard work. Divorcing is hard work. None of them are easy. None of them are more straightforward. When marriage gets messy, as it does, someone put something on social media the other day and it made me chuckle. And it was to do with a young couple getting married, and someone sends them a telegram. Remember the days you used to send telegrams? Happened in my day. That's how old I am. They sent a telegram that says, "Congratulations on your big day. Don't worry if things get difficult. It gets easier after the first 30 years." I want to tell you, it doesn't ever get easy. Because it's two broken, sinful people coming together. And marriage is not 50-50. Marriage is 100-100. We both have to give our all. Because if I only give 50% to my marriage, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to be in a whole heap of trouble. It's 100%, it's all or nothing. And the Bible tells us that marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. When I thought about not preaching because I can breathe for another 7 days, I thought, no, this is probably an ideal opportunity. Because this thing about surrendering everything to Him, even those things that we know we have to surrender, or those things we don't yet know what they are, it's a perfect picture of marriage. Because I have to give up some of my freedom, some of the things that I want to do in order to honour my wife or prefer my wife. And often divorce comes because one or both just become a little bit hard-hearted, a little bit selfish, a little bit, well, I don't care what you want, this is what I want. Actually, we need to surrender. We need to lay it down. And there are times that surrendering, there are times that when you have to apologise, but it's really hard. I don't want to do that. I don't deserve my apology. I'm not saying sorry to them. It's their fault. Anyone felt like that in a marriage? Yeah. That's not being like Jesus. That's not surrendering. Marriage is lots of fun, but boy, oh boy, it's hard work. Raising children is lots of fun, but oh man, it never ends. Even when they're coming up to 40 and they're going through a divorce, I want to protect my boy. I want to make everything right, but I can't because it's out of my control. I can't do anything, but the one thing I can do is surrender. Give it to Jesus. There's a wonderful encounter in John's Gospel, John chapter 4. Many of you will know it, where Jesus meets the woman at the well. And she's not just gone through divorce once. She's gone through it 4 times. That's a double portion. And Jesus says to her, "You're correct when you say," because the guy you've been married and divorced 4 times, and the man you are now living with is not your husband. But Jesus doesn't judge her. All he does is makes her aware that he knows what's going on. Jesus knows your pain. He knows your past. He knows everything about us. So why do we try and hide things from him? He already knows. So there's a statement that this woman makes, and she's speaking about a physical reality. And as I've been reading that passage again and looking at this and praying, I felt that the Holy Spirit just revealed to me something of a spiritual reality in something that she said that I'd never really thought about before. When Jesus asked her for a drink, she says, "Sir, the well is deep, and you have nothing with which to draw water from the well." Jesus says, if you knew who was asking, you would ask me for the water that I can give, because the water that I give is everlasting. If you drink from this well again, you'll get thirsty again. But if you drink from the well that I am and that I provide, you will never go thirsty again. You see, this passage is focusing on divorce. But Jesus isn't condemning. He's just highlighting. But actually, we all struggle with something. I have not been divorced, and God willing, I will never be divorced. But I struggle with other things. I can get angry really quickly. If somebody pushes my buttons, you better watch out. It takes for a lot for me to get there, but you better watch out. That's not pleasing to God any more than divorce is. Some of us, when we get offended by someone, or someone hurts us, boy, oh boy, do we hang on to it. I had a conversation with someone in the week about an issue that happened to them years ago, where when they were younger and someone stole the girl that they were interested in. And never spoke to the guy since, because he stole her from me. So I basically gave this person a cup to hold. We'll just keep talking. They felt really awkward. Let's just keep talking, keep your arms straight and hold it. And I could see after 10, 15 minutes, the cup was suddenly getting heavier. Their arm was suddenly getting sore because they were holding on to something that they shouldn't have held on to. How many of us do that? I tell you now, that's not pleasing to God. Anyone ever lied to get yourself out of trouble? That ain't pleasing to God. Anyone broke the speed limit in order to get somewhere on time? And it's a miracle. It's a Christmas miracle. I have no points on my license. Never had that since I first passed my driving test. I'm ashamed to say that, but that's the reality. That is not pleasing to God. You see, Jesus isn't just highlighting divorce here. The human condition is not God's ideal. The lying, the stealing, the cheating, the holding on to things, the unforgiveness, the bitterness, the anger, all those things that are part of our condition are not pleasing to God. But the good news is there is a deep well in Jesus. And if we draw from Him, all those things are forgiven. All those things are washed away. He refreshes us. He renews us. If only we will drink the living water that is available from the deep, deep well that is found in Jesus Christ. So you might be saying here this morning, well, this doesn't affect me. I've never been married. I can't get divorced. Or I've been married 65 years and I'm not getting divorced. It's not just about divorce. There's something in all our life. Jesus deals with divorce because that's the question he was asked. But he's highlighting that in our brokenness, in our sinfulness, we all have fallen short of God's ideal. But in Jesus there is forgiveness. In Jesus, he lifts us from where we are to where we ought to be. The woman who had no rights, you know, that in those days, if the guy fancied another woman or thought, she's more beautiful than my wife, he would just divorce her. If she made a rubbish meal, he could divorce her. If she didn't keep the house tidy, he could divorce her. It all depended on whatever whim he was feeling, and it just became a nonsense. So Jesus flags up the reason that the divorce certificate was given was simply because of your hardness of heart. But elsewhere he says, I will take away your stony heart and give you a heart of flesh. Anyone need to drink from the deep well that is in Jesus this morning? Whatever areas that we struggle in, whatever issues we deal with that we know are not God's ideal, the good news of the gospel is that whatever our past, however awful it may be, whatever other people may think, like the woman at the well, she came in the daytime, at the heat of the day when no one else was about, because she was ashamed. But Jesus engages with her, and Jesus transforms her life. And that Jesus is my Jesus. That Jesus is the same Jesus today. So we shouldn't walk around carrying all this weight and this baggage. By the way, did you know that God is divorced? God divorced Israel. He issued her with a certificate of divorce in Jeremiah chapter 3. Why? Because she was hard-hearted. Because she was unfaithful. So this idea that, well, I'm better than you because I've never been there. Hello? All have sinned. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, apart from Jesus, the one who is in and of himself this deep well of forgiveness and salvation and restoration and healing and blessing and wholeness. So how do we receive from that deep well? It goes right back to the two prophetic words. We surrender. We surrender. The woman at the well, she didn't care about her past. She didn't care about what people thought. She ran into the city and said to everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything." So yeah, we all know about you lot. Come and see this. And then the whole city was transformed. You see the difference that Jesus made? Even when you've been divorced 4 times, I don't recommend that to anyone. Because it is painful, it's hurtful, it is traumatic. But I think these things are in Scripture because it reveals to us that no matter what trauma we have experienced, no matter how much pain we have endured, either self-inflicted or at the hands of other people, in Jesus there is healing. There is restoration. There is forgiveness. There is a way back to God. So don't read these passages and feel condemned. Don't feel, oh, Brian was having a pop at me this morning. The gospel is good news. Whatever we've done, wherever we've been, whatever our past, it can be washed away. It can be erased because of this deep, deep well of living water that is found in Jesus. And if we put our trust in him, we put our faith in him, he says that same living water, rivers of that living water will flow from out of us. It's amazing, isn't it? Wonderful what God has done and what God can do. Next week we're on to the second juxtaposition, adults becoming like children. My wife will tell you I've never grown up. They're like a big kid. But the good news in the gospel is whatever pain or trauma or hurt we have experienced, our God is the God who can pour in oil and wine to bring healing and wholeness and blessing and hope and life. Don't walk around with our heads bowed down in shame. He is the lifter of our heads. Look at that woman that was caught in adultery. Isn't it strange in church? We will talk about anything, but we don't like to talk about sexual sin. It's a bit weird, isn't it? It's a bit personal. It's a bit crude. It's a bit But this woman was caught in adultery, was brought to Jesus. And he redeems her, he sets her free, and he lifts her head. In my mind's eye, I can see him putting his hand under her chin and lifting her head up. Where are those who would accuse you? Of course, they've all gone. And she was caught in the very act of adultery. Talk about a setup. Talk about a honey trap. All done again to trick Jesus. But instead of being caught by their trickery, he shows God's grace and God's mercy. Don't let any one of us feel condemned, feel a weight of sin and shame. That's what the cross was all about. He bore all that on our behalf if we place our trust in him.